Great. It's really a pleasure. My name is David Dabscheck. Pleasure to be moderating this panel and chairing this panel because, as was said, I think we all believe college campuses are probably one of the most critical areas that delegitimization is happening on. Not just with what's happening today, as concerning as it is, but what is then the implications for what type of country we will be in 20 and 30 years down the track. How will these college students grow up and lead the country? And I think what is really amazing about having these people here is that a lot of people talk about college campuses, but we're really privileged to have people that know college campuses. So just very quickly, and I'm sure they'll want to introduce themselves. We have Zoe, who works with the WZO, a graduate of Wesleyan University, as well as the New York, I think, director of the WZO on campus. Rafi Mark from Rutgers University, which people have seen a lot in the news, also the president of the Israel Club on campus there. Eric Schorr from Columbia University, president of LionPac, which is the pro-Israel club in Columbia University. So what I might start off with, and we could start maybe with Zoe, if you want to tell me a little bit about the campus environment, how you see it, and perhaps some instances of delegitimization, how people have responded.
Hi everyone, my name is Zoe Jick. I'm the New York Regional Director for the WZO, which means that I am in charge of creating and leading Zionist seminars on campuses in the New York region. I have this job because I'm lucky to express my deep love of Israel in my everyday life. I love Israel from the deepest crevices of my being. And also because from my own experience on campus, I'm deeply, deeply committed to changing the way that Israel is discussed and the climate of conversation on campus. Already in my 6 weeks at this job, I have stories about the way that this is playing out in the New York region, but I actually think that the best case study comes from my own experience at college. I love Wesleyan very much. What I'm about to talk about is not a statement on my college experience. Wesleyan is a wonderful school. Israel discussion at Wesleyan is, well, I don't know how well you are familiar with Wesleyan, but we are proud to call ourselves a liberal arts campus. New England liberal arts happens to be relatively left-leaning. Our Israel environment, there's one Israel-related group on campus. It's called ADAPT. ADAPT stands for Awareness and Dialogue About Palestine Today. I arrived as a freshman and decided it was not on me to change the way campus discussion was happening. I didn't want to have the emotional turmoil of being the point person for Israel advocacy. By the time I was a junior, I changed my mind and decided that it was important that we have an Israel club on campus. I printed out the events calendar back from 2009, I think it was. From the posting that I posted on campus, it read like this: "Come to the inaugural meeting of Wesleyan's pro-Israel advocacy organization. We are a group based on issues including support of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, commitment to the two-state solution, and calling out blatant media biases. Come brainstorm how to proceed. All are welcome." I still consider this to be a relatively benign posting. However, within a few hours, I had received anonymous responses such as the following. "I'm surprised that at such a prestigious and liberal school full of smart people, there are people so ignorant of the situation in Israel and so fully engrossed in unfounded and disgusting rhetoric that they actually believe what they are writing here. It doesn't make sense to me." Another one includes, "When I first saw this, it made me sick. But that overwhelming response is in favor of the Palestinians and against Israeli occupation, murder, and ethnic cleansing gives me hope yet. I think that this group has either two options: never meet, or enact Israel's policies against Muslims on campus. If the members of this group don't feel comfortable stealing the rooms of Muslim students, cutting off their access to food, electricity, and water, bombing them repeatedly, torturing them, denying them access to classes, facilities, and jobs, and generally disrespecting them in every way, then they should not advocate for Israel's right to exist." So then I stepped off the podium as head of the Israel Advocacy Group. I didn't think that that was what I wanted to be spending my time doing. But a year later, after a friend of mine named Avi Schaefer was killed in a car accident, I used the model that he enacted at Brown to change the way conversation was happening on campus at Wesleyan. This is a letter that I wrote to the Wesleyan community through the newspaper, which I thought was a better way to address the whole campus. I propose a new method of conversation about the Israel-Palestine conflict at Wesleyan. All are invited to participate, no matter what your opinion is on this issue. I want to hear you share your personal stories. Why do you care about Israel and Palestine? Where do you stand on these issues? How have your opinions changed? What would you like to see happen on this campus? I hope we will listen to each other generously and empathically in order to further dialogue and not obstruct it. I believe that in hearing others' stories, we will better understand how we can improve Wesleyan's engagement with Israel and Palestine activism. By meeting others who care about this issue, we will open the opportunity to form meaningful relationships. By listening to each other's opinions, we will better acquaint ourselves with the nuances of this deeply personal and complicated conflict, allowing for more powerful action and more successful work. I'm not at Wesleyan anymore, so I don't know how this has progressed, but when I held this open meeting, 60 people attended, which is 10 times larger than any Israel-related meeting I had ever been to on campus. It lasted for 2 hours. People were respectful. They listened to each other. It was the first time that the debate hadn't been polarized, that delegitimization was happening on campus because no one was listening to each other. They assumed that if you were affiliated with either one of the sides in theory, they already knew what your opinion was. Now that I'm at the WZO, the best thing that I can hope to do is to foster environments on campus where people are actually listening to each other. Because knowing how I feel about Israel and knowing the truth about what Israel activism can be, I believe that in having people talk to each other, delegitimization will eradicate itself.
I just want to say as well, so we don't have all the fun up here. We do want to have time for questions from the audience. So this will just be a sort of introduction, a conversation, and hopefully people there, which I'm sure they do, will have some questions for our panelists.
My name's Rafi Mark. I'm from Rutgers University. Our story's a little bit different. We have a very large pro-Israel Jewish community, and as of last year, we now have a very vocal anti-Israel community. Coming from my freshman year, I'm a junior now, my freshman year, there was almost no talk about anti-Israel sentiment or activity, and then last year, we had a large number of events that demonize the state of Israel, and 3 that I want to bring up and focus on very briefly, just to give you a rundown of what it was like to be at Rutgers. We started off the year with a Gaza Flotilla fundraiser that received media attention as being an example of how Rutgers Hillel pro-Israel community was trying to stifle free speech when we tried to get money that was raised through university funding, not sent to fund terrorism. And we had to kind of scramble together to tell the university that funding this flotilla was funding terrorism and was against American law and American ideals. We were actually successful, and the money didn't go to the Gaza flotilla, but instead went to Red Cross aid into Gaza, which was kind of a win for us. But then we then had our 2 more extreme events. One was we had an apartheid wall erected right into the middle of campus, where we had a group of Jewish students who went and set up a table that talked about, the positive aspects of Israel and how Israel's not an apartheid state. The 2 tables were right next to each other, and while the dialogue between the 2 groups was mostly non-existent, and when it was civil, there were examples of students being told that they had killed Palestinians, that they, by virtue of having been to Israel, were themselves occupiers, responsible for these other students' families' deaths, loss of land, as if we had personally done this as Rutgers students. That was a very eye-opening and intense day for a lot of us. It was kind of a change from just speakers and programs into, interactive discourse, and it was wild. The last thing that I want to bring up as an example of what anti-Israel activity is at Rutgers is probably the most famous that's happened at Rutgers, the Never Again for Anyone event. As some of you may know, Never Again for Anyone was a program brought around by the American Muslims for Palestine and the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. and it brought together two Holocaust survivors, two Jewish Holocaust survivors, as well as two Palestinians, one an academic and one a survivor of a genocide committed by the IDF. And the four of them spoke about how the Jewish people use the Holocaust to justify their own Holocaust in Gaza and the West Bank against Palestinians. The event was very anti-Semitic. There were speakers who got up and said the Holocaust wasn't such a big deal. They only killed 6 million. But I didn't hear any of that for myself. Because when I showed up to the event with approximately 300 other pro-Israel students and community members, the free and open to the public event became $5 entry fee to anyone who was pro-Israel. We actually had a student volunteering for this organization, because she's a very liberal student and loves to be involved, who heard one of the organizers say, if you see anyone who looks like them, looks like they're not friendly to our cause, they have to pay $5. That same person also was overheard saying, the event was supposed to be free until all these Zionists showed up. So of the 300 students and community members who had showed up to say, we support Israel, and Israel is not committing a Holocaust, 4 were able to actually attend the event. 2 of them had to pay for the event. So it was a very, very eye-opening night for us at Rutgers. The university was, we reported to the university what had happened, how it was biased against Jews and people who supported the state of Israel, and how it was falsely advertised. And the initial response was, they have free speech, we're not going to deal with it. We had to push. We had students who had filed bias reports through the university who were told, I'm sorry, it's their right to free speech. I'm sorry that you felt uncomfortable. You should really reach out to this group again. I'm sure it wasn't the right environment for you to get involved with them. Try again, it must have been your fault. Upon further pressure, we actually were able to get the university to ban the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network from Rutgers space for the next 3 years. But we're still waiting on a response to some of these bias reports and to some of the other anti-Israel and anti-Semitic statements and interactions that went on that night. And the university is claiming to be looking into the event still, but seem to be pretty set on saying free speech and we're sorry you were upset. That's just a brief rundown of Rutgers.
And I thought Columbia was bad. Though hi everyone, my name is Eric Schorr. I'm the president of LionPac at Columbia, the largest pro-Israel group on campus. We are one of 4 groups within the Hillel, but I wanted to make that known before I begin. Many of you probably have heard Columbia in the news, at least in the last 4 or 5 years. We hosted His Highness Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2007, and we almost had a second run around this past week. And I won't bore you with the details of our apartheid weeks or our mock checkpoints or the anti-Israel activity that goes on in the middle of our campus by students. Instead, you've heard it from Rafi. We have more or less the same. We had Never Again for Anyone. We've had these things go on at Columbia, and they go on persistently. But one of the things that isn't talked about, and that needs to be talked about, is anti-Israel bias and delegitimization in the classroom, something I've experienced firsthand. And that's something that is very touching, especially in an academic environment as a student. At Columbia University in particular, we have professors like Rashid Khalidi and Joseph Massad, Nadia Abu El-Hajj. I could go on and on. But what goes on in the classroom is, as Rafi pointed out, a subject of freedom of speech, at least on the grounds of Columbia University, where our prestigious president, Bollinger, talks about free speech all the time. And that is a value that we very much hold dear at Columbia as an Ivy League and as a liberal arts college. And what I want to talk about in terms of in the classroom is exactly what do students face? What do they deal with in an environment that is incredibly hostile and that just grows in hostility? Now, as a student in the joint program, I'm also at the Jewish Theological Seminary right down the street. I take classes at Columbia and I take classes at JTS. And for somebody who studies part-time, I guess, Judaism and Jewish identity, to hear one's own identity and one's own convictions being academically deconstructed and systematically, intellectually delegitimized right across the street is very difficult. I'll give you a few examples. In a class just 2 years ago, Israeli-Palestinian Society and Politics, taught by Professor Massad, Joseph Massad. The class had a number of students in it, and at the very beginning, the class, Professor Massad walked in, and being somebody who's been involved in pro-Israel activism since coming to college, I had heard so much about him. And what I want to make certain is that I separate right here and right now the person from the opinion, because we can't move forward unless we tackle the opinion, we tackle the bias, and not the person himself. Professor Massad was very kind, he was very nice, he was warm, he was endearing, he was friendly, students liked him. And that can be dangerous when you have somebody like that at a podium, at his dais, speaking his mind, speaking his personal bias in an academic setting. Professor Massad, increasingly, as the course went on, got more and more, I would say, volatile. The course, Israeli-Palestinian Society and Politics, began with an examination of Zionism and the history of Zionism. The syllabus, in order, was Edward Said's The Question of Palestine, Rashid Khalidi's Palestinian Identity, and his own book, Massad's book, The Persistence of the Palestinian Question. The next two books on the syllabus, I should say three, the next two were Herzl's Der Judenstaat and Alt Neuland. And the third one after that, in conjunction with Herzl's two books, was Shlomo Sand's The Invention of the Jewish People. Why were Herzl's books on this syllabus? Because Massad's thesis, as it went, was that Herzl was inherently anti-Semitic and manipulated anti-Semitism for his colonial racist project called Zionism. That was his thesis. That was what's going on in our classrooms around the country. Now, to have a situation like that is very difficult because you're a student. You are not inherently in a position of power vis-a-vis a professor. And what I would say as a student who went through this course and who was tested time and again in terms of my own identity, in terms of my own convictions, you get to a point where you either go one way or you go the other. You will become more confident, you will be able to speak up, you will ask questions, you will challenge, or you will close up, and I've seen it happen. And what we must do, and we have to tackle the delegitimization problems that happen with student groups and individual students on campus. Apartheid Week is a problem, don't get me wrong, but it's just as much of a problem when a professor stands up and in the middle of a academically free environment spews such hatred. And I can't stress that enough. So I want to give all facets equal levity here. And we cannot forget that it's just as bad outside the classroom as it is inside the classroom.
Thank you to all you three for sharing, I think, a variety of experiences from different areas. I might just start off a question if anybody wants to address it, and then we'll open up for questions. I think as Michael Miller said quite rightly before, how do we get the conversation out of the Jewish community? So my question would be, there's some very disturbing experiences. What have you seen that is effective in sort of either delegitimization or overcoming this, and especially in terms of reaching out beyond, say, the pro-Israel clubs? So I think Zoe started to talk about it. I know you have a leadership dinner if you want to talk about some of those issues.
I guess I'll start. We'll just go by. Real quick, it's something that we've been increasingly sort of concerned with and dealing with at Columbia. Since I came into leadership in LionPac a year and a half ago, one of my major projects has been getting involved in our movement, non-Jews and Christians and Indians and people from outside the community, people who are not traditionally involved in pro-Israel activism. And I'm happy to report that this semester we are starting Christians United for Israel at Columbia University. In addition to that, last year, and I just want to make a shout out, my Director of Cultural Affairs is here, Jill Meltzer, sitting in the audience, and she was involved in a project that we had last year in April where we hosted members of the Vanguard Leadership Group, Gerard Jordan and Michael Hayes, who is they are an African-American group, predominantly non-Jewish, African-American group down in the South, in Atlanta, that deal with leadership on campuses and pro-Israel activism, work very, very much with AIPAC. And we hosted Gerard Jordan and Michael Hayes of this Vanguard Leadership Group at Columbia last spring. And we hosted, along with them, was a leadership dinner with 25 members of the Black Student Organization at Columbia who, to my knowledge, none of them had ever been involved in pro-Israel activism, didn't really know what was going on, and 25 young leaders in LionPac. And a caveat to that story, it was a very successful event, as Jill can probably tell you. Everyone was mingling. It was fantastic. The caveat to that is it irked the Students for Justice in Palestine at our campus. They saw what was going on, and they're a bit scared because, no, legitimately, because they have found in the past that BSO, Black Student Organization, have been a traditional ally of theirs, and we are making that outreach movement. We are reaching out to the blacks. We are reaching out to the Indians. We are reaching out to the Asians. We are reaching out to the Christians. And by God, we will reach out to the Muslims. And if I find moderate Muslims, we're going to do it.
So Eric stole my thunder a little bit. We also have our Christians United for Israel starting up at Rutgers, which actually stemmed from our Never Again for Anyone event. We had a few students who happened to be in the student center at the time of the event and came over and asked about, what was happening. And when they saw what was going on, they felt that they needed to get involved. So that was how our Christians United for Israel came about. In addition, we also have a leadership dinner, which is for not just one specific organization, but we open it up to a majority of student organizations and student leaders. At our first one last year, we had over 100 people present, which represented over 70 student organizations, which were political, religious, cultural. We had Greek life, we had club sports, we had student government, we had such a variety of opinions and backgrounds at this dinner. And the appeal, aside from a free dinner and to meet other student leaders, was we brought in Congressman Lance and Pallone to talk about support of Israel regardless of political affiliation. It was a huge success, and out of that we were actually able to co-sponsor and co-program with 3 other organizations for large programs, as well as open up conversations with a lot of other student organizations. I want to finish up with one very current piece. This past week, we had an event that was co-sponsored between our 2 pro-Israel organizations on campus, as well as 2 of our LGBT, which is the queer community. One was the Queer Student Alliance, which is the largest queer student group on campus, and our Jewish Allies and Queers, which is a way to bring Jewish students and the gay community together. Those 4 organizations came together and brought in a former IDF officer who spoke about his time in the IDF and the comparison of gay rights in Israel as compared to the rest of the Middle East. The event was protested, and afterwards there was a lot of hateful speech posted, not on the Rutgers Hillel or the Rutgers Pro-Israel websites, but on the Queer Student Association's Facebook page. Now, before I could even respond to what some of these people had written, there were students responding, hey, I agree with you. What goes on in Israel to the Palestinians is horrible, but you really can't do that to another organization bringing a speaker. We had anti-Israel students speaking out in favor of Israel and our right to bring a speaker to talk about the positive aspects of Israel. So one of our biggest ways to combat delegitimization this year is to work on this positive image of Israel through other student organizations. Because at the end of the day, no no non-Jewish organization is going to want to just hear what we have to say. They're going to want to hear what their own people have to say. And so the fact that the Queer Student Alliance had brought this speaker in, as well as Rutgers Hillel, was what empowered these students to speak out in favor of our right to free speech and pro-Israel statements, even though they personally lean more to the left and even against Israel at times.
So I'm not on campus anymore, but I do work with campuses. And I am a firm believer in that all these problems are going to start dissipating once we open up conversation between all the people who are involved. I really believe that a line that I've heard before, an enemy is someone whose story you haven't heard yet. So I really believe that if people are starting to listen to each other and forming personal relationships with each other, that these problems are going to start to dissolve on their own. So one thing that I'm doing with the WZO is I'm hosting a leadership workshop that I'm running after the Chagim on Hunter College and Queens College campuses. And it's an invitation-only leadership workshop between the heads of the Hillel board, the Israel clubs, and any other Israel-related organizations on campus, whether it be J Street or others, to hold a Zionist text study where we talk about the relationship between Zionism and their Jewish identities, and then have them brainstorm ways that they can all work together to improve the way that this conversation is happening on their campus, since this is an issue that's important to all of them at the core of their Jewish identities. So this is happening in the next 2 weeks, and I'm really hopeful about the way that this is going to work.
Thank you. I might, because we have a microphone, people can see in the left hand of the stage. If people, I'll invite people if they want to ask some questions. What I would say, and I'll take the moderator's prerogative here, when I say question, let's try to make sure statements end with a question mark. I know this is a very emotive issue, but we don't have much time, and I really want to hear what the panelists have to say on some of these issues. So perhaps we'll take the first question.
Shalom. My name is Dr. Harris, and I work with Muslim Zionists and actually Muslims who like Jews, and actually I do that on the Queens College campus and at the Hunter campus, and we've had this program for 5 years. So the question, and I'll try to make it a question, is that the experience that we've had is that there's resistance amongst Jewish students to work with Muslim students, even after Muslim students come and work with Jewish students. So, and you do wonderful work, is that I think it's great. So how, from your perspective, one, do you overcome that resistance, whether it be prejudice or just giving up on, well, we can't ever convince them that it's on our side?
We might just have one panelist respond to it.
So we actually have a Jewish-Muslim interfaith group, and it was met with a little bit of hesitancy and that kind of, I don't know if this is going to work attitude. But I think especially in the realm of pro-Israel work, at least my experience at Rutgers, is anyone who is willing to come out and be pro-Israel and want to work with us, we will work with regardless of religious or other affiliations. I think anyone who has those hesitations will realize very quickly that someone who, though they are Muslim, is saying, you know, I'm pro-Israel, I'm pro-Jewish, they'll overcome that very fast. Our interfaith group, the Shalom Salam, as it's called, was, as soon as they had their first event and people saw that it was successful, it's just grown exponentially.
Please.
Hi, Lenny Cole. I'll try to end with a question mark, but I do want to first thank you all, really, all three of you, or four of you, but the three student or ex-student in one case. Marvelous presentations, and Rafi, I just want to do something that I think would be a service to everybody here. Add a little bit to your excellent recounting of what Rutgers had experienced, and especially in late January with this Never Again program. Let me talk about this from the obverse end, not as a student, obviously, but from a community person. About 3 or 4 days before this Never Again program, this is the one that was held during Holocaust Awareness Week, and I think the theme was we're opposed to genocide, whether it's by Jews or against Jews. I got a call from Andrew Getreyer, who's the Hillel director, And he was very, very concerned. In fact, I'm being gentle. He called this a crisis about what was happening, because the perspective, which I don't think this group has heard from you, Rafi, was that in the previous months, that is in November and December, there were no fewer than 7 anti-Israel events on campus, all of which had been attended by very, very few Jewish students. Many of the Jews on campus either are, as in many cases, elsewhere as well, not concerned or they don't feel themselves a part of the issue. The difference in this one case, by reaching out to the community, and I was among the 200 plus people from outside the Rutgers campus who did attend, according to Andrew, and help me if I'm wrong, but according to Andrew, the numbers of supporters that came was a fundamental encouragement for the Jewish students on campus to feel emboldened and empowered in a way that they had not before. They sort of felt isolated, alone in their campus activities. So if there's a lesson here, and if that is an accurate recounting by Andrew Getreyer, many of the students who otherwise might be reticent to be active or at least even attentive to these issues would change if they saw more of general support from others, including outside the community, to work with you, right?
Yeah. I'll give this there. I think what I would actually like to pan on and build upon that, because I think it's a great response. Not only what you've seen as effective, is how can people here, how can the community help you in your work?
I think it's a very, very important point. I just real quick want to comment on it and sort of answer your question a little bit. It's a delicate issue, and I'll explain why. At least at my school, Columbia, we have a certain model, a certain way that we do things on campus. And fundamentally, the model of the Columbia Barnard Hillel, which is the main center of Jewish life at Columbia University. Okay. So the model at Columbia University is student empowerment. Usually, basically everything that goes on at the Columbia Barnard Hillel is by students, for students, and of students. And I would sort of be a little sensitive to the idea that members of the outside community who want to be involved and really do want to show support, do so in a context that is working with the students from their point of view, not sort of coming at them very strong and sort of like, oh, we have to do something about this. The best example I can give you is last week when the word spread through Fox News, erroneously by the way, that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was going to be again at Columbia at a student banquet with Columbia University students. I got an outpouring of emails and phone calls from members of the community enraged that this was going on. Oh, we have to do this. Why aren't you guys doing this? You have to do this. And for me as a student leader, I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Let me work with my fellow students and my leaders on campus to figure out exactly, number one, what's going on, number two, what a proper response should be, and three, even if we should respond. This is Iran we're talking about. This isn't just a pro-Israel agenda item. This is a world agenda item. And it ended up being, and we took our time and our patience, and in conjunction with outside support, nominally, we ended up having a rally that was hosted by not unaffiliated students, had nothing to do with Israel whatsoever. And I would just caution anyone who wants to be involved from the community to do so, sort of not quietly, but softly, and with a little bit of caution, because we don't want people stepping on our toes too much. We are students. We know. I like to say students know their campuses best. If you want to know what's going on at a particular university, talk to the students. Don't watch Fox News and don't watch CNN, because they're not going to report it correctly.
I'm afraid to touch this. I'm afraid to touch
Sorry, 1 second. Before we take the next question, unfortunately, I was going to wait to the end. Unfortunately, one of our panelists, Rafi, has to catch a train. I know there's been a lot of depressing talk, but having leaders like this, I think, and like Rafi, gives us hope for the future. So we'll just take, I know it's going to wrap up. We're going to take one more question, if possible, please.
Mindy Stein. I'm chairman of the board of Emunah of America. And this is for Eric Schorr, I guess because I have a daughter that's at Columbia. And I had a daughter a few years ago, and nothing's changed. Because in one of her classes, right after September 11th, in George Saliba's class, it was all anti-Zionism. And I'm wondering if you have engaged, first of all, thank you for your presentations, they were excellent. I wanted to know if you have engaged any Jewish or non-Jewish professors together to go to the deans and talk to them about what's happening in the classroom. Because since my daughter, she's 30, had this happen, how come this is not changing? And can you get the Jewish and non-Jewish professor to be more active? Also, one more question. If you have to offset Apartheid Week, isn't it possible that earlier on than March, you have a week of Israel Humanitarian Week so that they can see what you're doing positive and not wait to be on the defensive when you get to a March Apartheid Week?
Thank you for asking that question. And the reason I'm thanking you is because tomorrow evening, we have a faculty-student dinner with Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. It's the first one we've ever done. We have professors from Columbia graduate schools, from Columbia undergraduate schools, meeting with our students, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. And we're going to start this movement to get professors back into the pro-Israel work on campus.
Very good, excellent. About
In terms of anti-Israel bias in the classroom, what I spoke about before, that's a very lengthy process, something we will be discussing tomorrow, something that is going to take our time over the course of the next few years. I mean, I'm graduating in May, but I hope to start this work now because something that needs to happen is not just students rising up. Like I said, we don't come from a position of power, but when we band together, we do. And with professors behind us, it'll be all the more easier. George Saliba, I took his class. I could talk to you afterwards. I've got some interesting things to say about him, but that's for another time. In terms of what you said about sort of preparing, here's another thing, something that we started thinking about after our first Israel Apartheid Week 2 years ago. We just this year started our, we have a new position on our executive board called Research and Response. And the Director of Research and Response's main job over the course of the entire year is weeks, months in advance. He's even starting now, is to prepare for Israel Apartheid Week and all these other anti-Israel demonstrations. But the great thing, and that's why I love that Jill is here. Jill is our Director of Cultural Affairs, and in conjunction with other directors on our board, are going to be focusing predominantly. That's why we have the Research and Response position, is going to be focusing predominantly on pro-Israel, proactive, moderate, positive programming on campus. And that's what we need to focus on. We're going to get the good voices, we're going to get the good people once, as long as we're doing like Israel humanitarian aid, Israel helping Haiti, Israel that's providing relief after earthquakes, stuff like that shows Israel's humanitarian and good side that too often is sort of lost in the sea in the wave of anti-Israel activism. And what I love is that this past week on 20 campuses across the United States, International Hillel hosted Talk Israel tents in the middle of college campuses. We had one at Columbia, and what was great, we were talking about everything, our love affair with Israel, why we love Israel, what has Israel done, the tent movement that's going on in Israel, modern, sort of topics that are right now, the, agenda topics. And what did SJP do? The Students for Justice in Palestine were over yonder a few meters away, and they had no idea what to do with themselves. Why? Because we were on the other side of the line now. We were doing positive programming, and they had no idea what to do.
Excellent, thank you.
I do apologize. We really have run over. I don't think we have time for another question. Did you, Zoe? I know you wanted to make a concluding comment.
A quick point I wanted to make is that I'm in this really interesting position of still being fresh enough off of campus to really understand what it means to be a student, and also now learning the ins and outs of the secret world of Jewish institutional life. And I can't express enough that what I've learned about the WZO since I started working here, and what I've learned about all the other organizations that you guys must all be affiliated with, is that you all have incredible resources and motivational tools and all these incredible things you guys are doing. Students don't always know about them. So if you guys have leadership conference, we have the WZO conference, and also we're sending kids to the GA. I know that APAC has the Saban Leadership Conference. If any of you know of other conferences and motivational tools that you can help me tell students about, or grant money to send them to these conferences, I'd love
Grant
to
money,
hear.
please.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about it so I can tell these students who all just want to be motivated.
Thank you. I just want to say I think it was very appropriate. We probably ended with this panel. We had a lot of very tough issues, a lot of challenges we talked about all day. And to know that there's leaders, young leaders like this, that are coming up through campus, that are doing such great work, I think gives hope that we can really overcome the challenge of delegitimization and really be able to go on the offensive. So thank you, the panelists. Thank you for your time. I know there are some people with questions. If people here, please speak to them. Thank you.
Who is My name is Philip Meltzer, and I have the privilege of saying a few words and introducing the closing session. We've been very fortunate today. In a period of 3 days, it seems, there was only one 7-hour period, we've heard leaders of academia, of organizations, of the community, speak to us on the problems of delegitimization and anti-Semitism. I think we've learned a lot. One of the things I've learned most is what is most important is that we educate the future, that we educate our young and educate ourselves. I think the most important panel was the last one that we heard. I mean, that's our future, and that we have to go back to our organizations, go back to our communities, and recognize that if we don't educate the future, we don't have much of a future. Now, this whole seminar was put together by really 3 people. Karen Rubenstein as the professional. I want to thank Karen. And 2 leaders, both in Israel and the United States, Yaakov Hagoel and Bill Hess. I'd like to thank them and ask them to summarize the session, to give a call to action to us, and then for the 2 of them to lead us in HaTikva. Bill?
Just a quick repetition. I think you've heard all of this before, but put it in your minds and keep it there. Stay involved. Stay active. Stay informed. Read the Israeli press in English, in Hebrew, in Russian, in Spanish, in French, in whatever language, in every language. Learn Hebrew. Spread the word. As you've heard, people don't know and they need to know. Israel is the project of the entire Jewish people, all over the world. Zionism is the skeleton on which the rest of Jewish life hangs. So I want you to include Israel in your relationship to it in making your cheshbon hanefesh for this during these days, coming days of awe. A conference such as this doesn't happen just overnight. However, there's sufficient interest in the subject matter that we were fortunate enough to garner some of the best and brightest minds on the subject on very short notice. I know you agree that we've all had our sensitivities stimulated. This is the job of a Zionist organization. This is the job of a Zionist movement, and why it remains a relevant ideology even more than 100 years since its formation. Be it on a local or global level, we all need to work at it and to support it. Speaking of support, you may have gotten a free lunch, but there were pledge cards in the program, and they were not trash. Whereas there was no charge for the conference, and it is a public service to your Zionist movement, you are more than welcome to show your support and appreciation by making a donation to AZM to help either offset our costs, to help students on campus, and those of the WZO. I would encourage membership in the Herzl Circle of the American Zionist Movement, which is $1,800, as the most concrete and direct statement of support. Thank you. Thank you also for coming, for staying, for your sitzfleisch, and for your respect. Thank Yaakov and Eitan, that's Yaakov Hagoel, Yaakov Aharoni, and Eitan Behar, for putting up with us, because we lobbied very hard to make this conference work and put it together. I'm going to thank the staff of the Lighthouse of the Blind, the Lighthouse Center, Mark and Kevin and all your staff for having made this facility work beautifully for us. Kol hakavod. Thanks to the speakers and to the session leaders and for keeping on time. It's very difficult to do. But a special thanks, Susan, if you'd come up with what you have, to Karen, if you'd come up, and if Susie, if you'd come up, and if Sherry, if you'd come up, and all of the AZM staff. We have just this very small token of appreciation from us to you, and I hope that you agree that they have made all of us proud. So kol hakavod and thank you. Yaakov.
Are you like a red or an orange person? I'm an orange person. Okay. Yeah, 'cause I'm a- yeah, that's- okay, good job.
תודה רבה, תודה רבה. תודה רבה.
איתן. Yes, sir. Coming to Tagum?
לא, לא צריך, לא צריך.
לא צריך?
לא צריך.
Okay.
I would like to thank those who made this event success. One, Karen Rubinstein, Susie Baumel, Sherry Fisher, Samantha Vinakur, Eitan Bachar, and Mr. Bill S. ואני שמח, היברו.
I'm very happy.
Please rest for התקווה, please. ביל. כל עוד בלבב פנימה, נפש יהודי הומיה, ולפתק נזרח קדימה, עין לציון צופיה. עוד לא אבדה תקוותנו, התקווה בת שנות 2000, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. Thank you and שנה טובה.
שנה טובה מתוקה. תודה לך.
טוב מאוד.